The Houses of Parliament witnessed one of the most explosive Prime Minister's question sessions in recent memory.
The surviving hostages are free. Yeah. The bombardment of Gaza has stopped. Yeah. And desperately needed aid is starting to enter as a result of the peace plan led by President Trump. We have the chance, and it is a chance, to bring a terrible chapter in history finally to a close. Mr. Speaker, it's a moment of profound relief for this House, for this nation, indeed for the whole world. But it is tempered, of course, by the knowledge that for the hostages and their families, for the loved ones of those killed on October the 7th, and for the innocent civilians in Gaza, the dead, the bereaved, the starving, this has been 2 years of living hell. I think of Avinatan Orr, who has family ties to the United Kingdom, returned at last to his family and to his girlfriend, Noah.
What unfolded in the chamber that day was nothing short of political warfare, as Keir Starmer found himself completely outmaneuvered by Kemi Badenoch over the catastrophic collapse of the China spy trial. The Prime Minister desperately tried to deflect blame while his carefully constructed narrative crumbled under relentless questioning. The China spy case has become the Prime Minister's worst nightmare. 2 men, Christopher Cash and Christopher Barry, were accused of passing secrets to Beijing between 2021 and 2023. Both denied the charges, but what happened next exposed the fundamental incompetence at the heart of Starmer's administration. The case collapsed spectacularly when the Crown Prosecution Service declared that the government had failed to provide sufficient evidence proving China was a threat to national security. Think about that for a moment. A government that claims to take national security seriously couldn't even prove that China poses a threat. This isn't just bureaucratic failure. This is a complete abdication of responsibility that puts British security at risk. Starmer walked into PMQs knowing he was facing a political execution.
Where's the United Kingdom? Where's Russia? Where? Come here. Is everything going good?
Very good.
It's very nice that you're here. These people all came in like 20-minute notice, and I think it's fantastic. And we have so many others, and just so many others.
Oh dear, I think he thought he was going to have his little moment and he was going to speak. You're not speaking, Keir. You had nothing to do with it. In fact, the likes of Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron from France, our own Prime Minister Albanese, really, they did not help this peace deal. They, if anything, set it back. And Marco Rubio made that point, didn't he? That every time one of them would pull a stunt, recognise the Palestinian state, the Palestinians would walk away from the negotiating table.
This moment, from a leadership perspective, belongs to President Trump. Everybody knows it, whether they admit it with celebration or they admit it begrudgingly. But you'll find these other people who want to sort of just steal a little bit of the credit. It's these world leaders. It's the Biden administration people were all over TV yesterday saying how they came up with the framework and they're glad to see that Trump and his team implemented the framework they were the originators of. So they're all kind of trying to do that. But everyone knows, and that's why you see him really seizing this moment. And if I were Keir Starmer, I might have come up with something a little bit different, like half a step back, stay in the frame, as opposed to completely turning his back and going that way. That didn't look good.
The atmosphere in the chamber was electric with anticipation. In a desperate preemptive strike, he made an unprecedented statement before Badenoch could even ask her first question. The Prime Minister announced he would publish witness statements from the collapsed case, but this wasn't transparency. This was damage control from a leader who knew his position was utterly indefensible. But Badenoch wasn't buying it. She demolished Starmer's opening gambit with surgical precision, calling his statement nothing but obfuscation. She demanded answers to the fundamental question that Starmer couldn't answer. How is it possible that a government charged with protecting national security failed so catastrophically to provide basic evidence? Starmer's response revealed the true desperation of his position. Rather than take responsibility, he launched into a pathetic blame game, pointing fingers at the previous Conservative government. He claimed that because the Tories hadn't officially designated China as an enemy, the prosecution couldn't proceed. This argument is not just weak, it's intellectually dishonest and politically cowardly. The reality is that Starmer's government had months to address any evidential shortcomings. They had the power to provide the necessary documentation. They had the responsibility to ensure that alleged spies faced justice. Instead, they allowed the case to collapse on their watch, and now they're desperately trying to shift blame. Badenoch exposed this deception with devastating effectiveness. She pointed out that the charges were brought under a conservative government, which completely undermines Starmer's narrative. If the Tories really hadn't provided adequate evidence, how were the charges filed in the first place? Starmer had no answer because there isn't one. The Prime Minister's legal background became a liability rather than an asset. When Badenoch questioned what the point was of having a lawyer as Prime Minister if he couldn't get the law right on national security, Starmer's response was telling. He sneered that Badenoch was clearly not a lawyer or a leader, displaying the kind of intellectual arrogance that voters despise. But this arrogance couldn't mask the fundamental problem. Starmer may be a lawyer, but he's proven to be a catastrophically incompetent leader. His legal expertise means nothing if he can't manage his own government effectively enough to prosecute alleged spies. The role of National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell became a particular source of controversy. Reports emerged of a secret meeting in September where Powell and other high-level officials discussed the case. Starmer dismissed these reports as a red herring and made a scurrilous accusation. But his defensive reaction only raised more questions about what his administration was trying to hide. Badenoch pressed relentlessly on this point, highlighting the contradictions in Starmer's account. The Prime Minister claimed that no minister or special advisor was involved in providing evidence, but then had to backtrack and say he would double-check. This isn't the behavior of a competent leader. It's the fumbling of someone who's lost control of his own government. The deeper implications of this scandal are genuinely alarming. Britain's enemies are watching, and they're seeing weakness. The collapse of this case sends a clear message that the UK cannot effectively prosecute espionage cases. This emboldens hostile actors and undermines our national security fundamentally. Starmer's attempts to quote previous conservative statements about China only highlighted his own government's failures. Yes, the Tories may have been cautious in their language about China, but they still brought charges against alleged spies. Starmer's government, despite all its tough rhetoric, couldn't even see those charges through to trial. The Prime Minister's promise to publish witness statements was presented as transparency, but it's actually an admission of failure. If the evidence was so clear-cut, why did the case collapse? If the previous government was entirely to blame, why couldn't Starmer's administration rectify the situation? These are questions that go to the heart of governmental competence. Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Collins became a central figure in this debacle. Starmer described him as a civil servant of the utmost integrity, but integrity doesn't excuse incompetence. Collins provided the witness statements that proved insufficient for prosecution. Whether this was due to political interference or simple incompetence, the responsibility ultimately lies with Starmer. The international ramifications of this failure cannot be overstated.
Yeah, I mean, from the Manchester attacks onwards, all we've wanted from Keir Starmer is just to keep his mouth shut. Yeah. Just don't say anything. It's clear that you've messed this up royally. You've humiliated Britain on the world stage by having Hamas celebrate celebrate your foreign policy one week and then celebrate the attack that you're trying to lament the next. And then suddenly, the cherry on the cake came when British officials from Bridget Phillipson downwards tried to claim credit for Trump's deal, only to be slapped down by the Americans who called them delusional. Yeah. I mean, it was just abject humiliation, not just for him. I mean, it's quite funny, to see Keir Starmer, a bit of schadenfreude from the viewing public, I think, but he's humiliating Britain as well.
Yeah. He really is, and that is the tragedy of it. I mean, nobody in this country, I think, wants to see our Prime Minister being humiliated, but because it's Keir Starmer and he's so unpopular, we quite like watching him.
China's intelligence services are undoubtedly celebrating this outcome. They've learned that they can operate in Britain with relative impunity because our government cannot effectively prosecute espionage cases. This is a strategic victory for Beijing and a humiliating defeat for British security services. Meanwhile, our closest allies watch in disbelief as Britain stumbles on the world stage, unable to handle even the most basic aspects of national security. Badenoch's performance at PMQs was masterful. She used all 6 of her allocated questions to systematically dismantle Starmer's position. Each question built on the previous one, creating an inescapable logical trap. The Prime Minister's responses became increasingly desperate as he realized he had no coherent defense. The Liberal Democrat intervention, focusing on the implications for Hong Kong residents in the UK, added another dimension to Starmer's problems. If the government cannot prosecute Chinese spies effectively, how can it protect those fleeing Chinese oppression? This question exposes the broader weakness in Starmer's China policy. Former Foreign Secretary James Cleverly's intervention over misquoted statements revealed another aspect of Starmer's desperation. The Prime Minister was so eager to blame the Tories that he resorted to misrepresenting their positions. When called out on this, Starmer looked petulant and defensive rather than prime ministerial. The timing of this scandal couldn't be worse for Starmer. His government is already facing criticism over its handling of various domestic issues, and now it's shown to be incompetent on national security matters. This is exactly the kind of failure that destroys public confidence in a government's ability to govern effectively. Kemi Badenoch's accusation that this stinks of a cover-up resonates because of Starmer's evasive responses. A competent government would provide clear, straightforward answers about what went wrong and how it would be fixed. Instead, we get obfuscation, blame shifting, and promises to publish documents that should have been adequate in the first place. The constitutional implications are serious. If the government cannot provide adequate evidence for espionage prosecutions, what does this say about our intelligence gathering capabilities? What does it say about interdepartmental coordination? What does it say about ministerial oversight? These are fundamental questions about how Britain is governed. Starmer's claim that no political direction was given to officials before they provided evidence is particularly unconvincing. Governments provide political direction constantly. That's what governance means. The idea that officials operated in a complete political vacuum is either naive or dishonest. The comparison with other failed prosecutions under previous governments is irrelevant. Starmer wasn't elected to continue previous failures. He was elected to govern competently. The collapse of this case on his watch is his responsibility, regardless of what happened under previous administrations. The security implications extend beyond this single case. If China's intelligence services believe they can operate with impunity in Britain, they will escalate their activities. This case collapse could trigger a significant increase in Chinese espionage operations on British soil. Starmer's failure has made Britain less safe. The political damage to Starmer is already evident. His approval ratings were already declining, and this scandal will accelerate that trend. Voters expect their government to protect national security effectively. When it fails so spectacularly, electoral consequences inevitably follow. The international community is also watching. Britain's allies need to know they can trust our security services and our government's commitment to countering hostile intelligence operations. This failure undermines that trust and potentially damages intelligence sharing arrangements that are crucial for national security. Badenoch's demand for all relevant correspondence and meeting records to be published is entirely reasonable. If Starmer truly has nothing to hide, he should welcome full transparency. His resistance to this demand only fuels suspicions that there's more to this scandal than he's admitting. The role of Attorney General Lord Hermer has also come under scrutiny. Critics argue it's inconceivable that he wouldn't have been involved in a case of this importance. If he was involved, why hasn't Starmer mentioned this? If he wasn't involved, why wasn't the government's most senior legal officer consulted on such a critical national security matter? The institutional damage extends beyond the current government. The Crown Prosecution Service's reputation has been damaged by this failure. The intelligence service's credibility has been undermined. The entire apparatus of British national security has been weakened by this governmental incompetence. Starmer's legal background, which was supposed to be an asset, has become a liability. Voters expected a former director of public prosecutions to handle legal matters competently. Instead, they've witnessed a catastrophic failure in the most important prosecution his government has faced. The timing of Powell's appointment as National Security Advisor is also relevant. His previous connections to China should have been considered when this case was ongoing. The appearance of conflict of interest, even if unfounded, should have been avoided through proper governmental procedures. The broader pattern of Starmer's governance is becoming clear. Whether it's economic policy, immigration, or now national security, his administration consistently fails to deliver competent governance. This isn't about political disagreement, it's about basic governmental competence, and Starmer is failing that fundamental test. The China spy case collapse will be remembered as a defining moment of Starmer's premiership. It exposed his government's incompetence on the most fundamental responsibility of any government, protecting national security. No amount of blame shifting or obfuscation can change that reality. Badenoch's demolition of Starmer at PMQs was more than political theater. It was a necessary holding to account of a prime minister who has failed in his most basic duty. The British people deserve better than this level of governmental incompetence, especially on matters of national security. The consequences of this failure will reverberate for years. China's intelligence services have learned they can operate with relative impunity in Britain. Our allies have seen our weakness. Our enemies have been emboldened. This is Starmer's legacy, and no amount of political spin can change that fundamental reality. The Prime Minister's promise to publish witness statements is too little, too late. The damage has been done, the case has collapsed, the spies have walked free, and Britain's national security has been fundamentally compromised by governmental incompetence. This is what happens when voters elect a government that prioritizes political posturing over competent governance. The China spy case collapse is a national security disaster that will define Starmer's failed premiership for years to come.